Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of our Data Center Direction podcast. This podcast is always focused on with executive leaders on where we see the future of the market. Today I'm delighted to welcome Matt to the podcast. Matt has been in the data center world for 4 years, and prior to that was spent 10 years in kind of real estate management and consulting, and he's currently the commercial ops director over at Yondr Group. So welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Happy to be here. Excited to talk data centers today.
Good man. So thanks for joining us. As always, I just always like our guests to start by telling us a little bit about the background and experience in kind of commercial operation leadership within the data center industry, etc. But yeah, do you want to give us a bit of background into yourself and your career?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Sean. So spent about 10 years in really traditional real estate, property management consulting. From there, post-COVID, I would say right around 2022, I took a jump into the data center industry and haven't looked back since. So in particular, where I focus is commercial operations. So my background in the data center field is really primarily focused on strong emphasis of commercial operations, operational leadership, infrastructure scaling, global delivery execution, things of that nature. So a large part of my career has involved really aligning operational strategy with commercial objectives, while supporting large-scale infrastructure growth is extremely fast-paced environments over the last 4 years. So what's been fascinating to watch is the industry evolution from traditional hyperscale growth to really now it's effectively a global race around AI infrastructure, power availability, and deployment speed. So I think people often think about building infrastructure at scale is really hard, but operating it reliably at global scale is even harder. So I think that's something that people lose sight of pretty often.
Definitely. And do you want to just give us, obviously you're still working for Yondr, do you want to just give us a high level overview of Yondr as a business?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Yondr, we are an owner, operator, developer of hyperscale data centers. We operate globally, so we have a number of data centers here in the Americas as well as in the EMEA region. We've been around for less than 10 years, about 10 years in total, and it's really starting to see some rapid growth for us, and it's really pretty much what we're seeing across the industry. So a lot of hyperscalers are doing real well right now.
Yeah, and obviously, like you said, the industry is experiencing in rapid growth. But great to see you obviously joining the industry 4 years ago, and kind of like you said, not looking back. And I'm sure you're doing a fantastic job over at Yondr. So how since you started, I suppose you started in the industry just over 4 years ago in the operations side. How have you seen kind of data center operations change over that time, and obviously especially with the growth of AI?
Yeah, I've seen it even in the last 4 years that I've been in the industry. I think AI really essentially accelerated everything: power, density, timelines, operational complexity. So really, if you think about it, 5 years ago, hyperscale growth really already felt aggressive, but I truly believe AI has dramatically compressed deployment timelines while simultaneously increasing infrastructure density, cooling requirements, operational complexity, things like that, right? So operators today are being asked to deploy really even faster than they've ever been asked to do before, while maintaining the same expectations around resiliency and uptime. So that balance between speed and operational discipline has become one of the defining themes of this industry right now. Really, AI didn't just increase demand; it accelerated, I think, the entire infrastructure lifecycle altogether. So.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you touched on it there. Obviously, you've seen like how does this add more pressure onto you operationally? Obviously, the speed, and demand from the hyperscalers, etc. But operation, I suppose, are you now seeing that you've got to work at speed faster than 4 years ago to keep up with the market ultimately?
For sure, I think it's like I mentioned earlier. It's one thing to say that you're scaling, right? But the reality is scaling at this speed is quite difficult. It's a real challenge. I think we're hyperscalers or operator owner developers fall short in a lot of areas is they think that they scale before they're actually scaling, right? So scaling it comes in phases. You're preparing for the initial scale, and then when it hits again, you better be ready to adapt, because what
Yeah,
you were doing 4 years ago, might have been sustainable in a smaller model, but as you really start hitting a global reach and you're bringing on larger and larger campuses, you really need to be process driven, process oriented. You can't just accept processes from years ago being acceptable or the right standard now. So I think
yeah.
that's where operators in this sector really need to look closely.
And imagine from an operations standpoint, you're thinking 2-3 years ahead where the industry may be, to try and keep up with the demand, because like if you were operating from an operations commercial perspective like 4 years ago, you'd kind of be left behind, I'd imagine.
I would agree. I think if you keep an old mindset in this industry or what was working 4 years ago, you're not going to be one of the ones successful at the end of this journey. So um, the evolution's changing. It's going to continue to change. What we're all working on now to try to gear up for this next wave of scaling
Yeah,
isn't going to probably be successful 4 years from now. So as the industry's changing, the operators behind it need to adapt and become more and more flexible. And that's something I think that's going to be really interesting to watch over the next few years here for us in this industry.
definitely. It's just so exciting to be part of the industry, like I said. So, and we touched on it, but what do you feel from your standpoint, the biggest operational and commercial challenges that the entire industry is facing right now?
It's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges, I mean, it's not just one challenge.
Yeah,
There's a
magnitude of
convergence.
challenges.
Yeah, there's a convergence of really multiple constraints happening simultaneously from my perspective. And I think power availability is probably the most critical issue across the industry right now. Not
Yeah,
not just our industry, but really many major markets.
yeah,
And I think, especially because of AI demand, it's really continuing to accelerate. So at the same time, operators are dealing with supply chain pressures. There's labor shortages. There's rising costs, and increasingly compressed deployment schedules, right? So I think something that's probably talked about a little bit more recently these days from the labor shortage side is, there's a lot of heavy concentration, right, in the Northern Virginia area, now Texas, Dallas, right? But that job market, as those giant campuses get built out from an operational perspective, really that pool gets smaller and smaller, right? Like there's limited talent pool out there. There's a
yeah,
lot of great people in this industry, a lot of incredibly resilient workers and really, educated people. But there is at some point there is an end to how many, people are able to come to the table and help you deliver at scale. So
yeah.
you
I
have good
think we're,
people, you really need to keep them. That's the
yeah,
focus.
exactly. Well, we're a staffing agency, right? So we ultimately operate at that level, and we see the demand from our clients, but it is so difficult to attract people. Doesn't matter everyone's kind of the supply and demand effect means that you have to maybe pay more, etc. But it's got to come from like training and education for me. Like obviously the industry, like yourself, have joined the industry and done a fantastic job. But what about the next generation? Because labour and especially construction and that kind of labour market, you know, it's more of an aging market in this space.
For sure.
That coupled with the extra demand that we're now facing is a massive challenge to actually build a facility, because we need labour to build the facilities, own the facility, as I'm sure you're aware.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The construction side of the industry faces those same challenges for sure.
Yeah,
So potentially probably even greater, right? Because a lot of those are all getting built at once in the same area.
yeah.
So general contractors, obviously there's a few big ones out there, but at a certain point, how many projects can you take on at one time? So
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, I know for a fact some of the bigger ones are just having to turn it down because they don't have the work. They don't have the workforce. So obviously their reputation online when they take on a project, if they can't meet expectation, that impacts obviously their global reputation. So it's so you don't want to take something on that ultimately you can't deliver on. You
Of course.
touched on like the operational commercial challenges. Like how have them challenges changed compared to a few years ago?
Yeah, so I think those challenges have really changed from a few years ago in that the industry is no longer just scaling compute, it's really scaling under constraint, right? So I think the difference a few years ago was that same constraint in the market probably wasn't being felt as it is right now.
Yeah,
So, it still felt new, even though it probably wasn't, depending who you're asking or who's taking a certain viewpoint on it. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing now is unprecedented versus, 4 or 5 years ago, right? So
yeah,
I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen is just the pressure for scale and the I think how success is measured is the ability to scale across the board, right? So
yeah.
I think that's been a huge shift that probably wasn't as much of a focus a few years ago. It was more of just like, let's get this thing going. Let's 80% is good enough, and then we'll progress from there. But really, people have to be more tactful, thoughtful, and forward thinking these days in our industry. And I think that's something that's really probably really jumped out to me over the last few years since I've been in the industry.
Yeah, I think like just this the like anything like the size and scale of the market has dramatically increased over 4 years. So that just has a knock-on effect from everything from an operational standpoint. If the data center 4 years ago was it's 4 times the size. Now operationally you have to be your 4x. So it's all that combined, the size and scale of the facilities is just having an effect across the wider industry, I'd say.
Agreed. Yeah, it's really it's going to be interesting to watch over the next few years. I expect that challenge is only going to grow from here. So it'll be
Yeah,
interesting to see how we in the industry respond to it. And I think it's important to share ideas within reason, right? Like we can't share intellectual property or things of that nature, but I encourage those in our industry to try to be successful together. If the industry succeeds as a whole, sharing great ideas with one
yeah.
another, I think within reason can really help.
I think the one thing that I've seen, especially over the last 12, 18 months, is there is a lot more collaboration, obviously like IP and different things, but I think people are now they have to there's so many, you'll see it yourself, there's so many on the supply chain, owners collaborating more with GCs and things like that. I think there has to be more collaboration because, you know, everybody wins then, don't they? If we collaborate better, it's such an enormous opportunity that you kind of have to, don't you? Because yeah, like you said, there's so many different facets that go into building a hyperscale facility.
Exactly. There's, less and less secrets in this industry today than there used to be. And I think that, that's why it's important to get out in the field, boots on the ground, going to different conferences, things like that. I think expanding your network, those are things that really make a difference and help people grow and stand out in our industry.
Yeah, and I think like, from even before we are talking about from an education standpoint, like the industry needs educating, but also the outside kind of industry. Like we every single person day to day, without knowing, I would say this, probably use a data center without even knowing. But I think like from an educational piece, we it needs to be more in the public domain to actually people to understand the use case of these facilities because obviously there's some political pushback, etc., and we all see that in the news regularly. So, but if people actually knew what they were using the facilities for and how they use them every day, I think that is where the industry can actually evolve and be better. Both talking amongst peers, but externally also, I think is really important.
For sure. I think people are afraid of change, especially, you buy a home that you wanted to live in for a very long time. And I'm sure when you bought it, probably data center wasn't in the plan.
Yeah,
So I think it's important to, the community outreach and really just partnering with the community better, I think is extremely important for us in this industry. I think it's important to not just say words that are trying to make people feel better because ultimately that's going to backfire.
Yeah,
backfire. I believe that actions definitely speak louder than words, and really for us, in this industry, I think it's important that we maintain good relationships with the communities, community outreach programs, charitable programs, or donations. Those are things that I think can really help build a better relationship between the communities and the data centers that are being built there. To your point, the data centers serve the communities, and I think we in this industry need to do a better job really explaining that and how it impacts everyday life. But
yeah,
we also need to do a better job being better partners to communities as well. I think that there's been some progress. I think that the negatives are always highlighted, obviously, but I'm optimistic the industry is going to really respond to the local communities that are really uncomfortable or unhappy with a new data center going in. So it's going to be
yeah.
interesting to watch, and hopeful that we meet a good middle ground and everyone can move forward positively.
Exactly. That's the way it has to be, doesn't it? So, you've obviously been in the industry 4 years. I'm sure you've seen a lot, but what kind of major operational business risk in this industry, that you're aware of isn't getting enough attention at the moment from an operational commercial standpoint?
Yeah, so I touched a bit on the um, operational scalability issue that's definitely prevalent right now. I think infrastructure sustainability is a huge challenge, particularly around power, as I mentioned. The industry is obviously moving incredibly fast, but utility infrastructure and grid scalability don't move at hyperscale speed. That's
Yeah,
something that, if you weren't aware of it, I'm telling you now, that's what we've all learned in this industry.
yeah,
It's been a challenge for sure.
yeah,
I also think that operational leadership and talent development are coming underestimated risks. I think that building facilities is one thing. Operating in increasingly complex global infrastructure reliably over time is really a completely different challenge. I don't want to take away from the power risk, though. I think for sure power may ultimately become the defining constraint of the next generation of hyperscale growth. I cannot stress that enough. That's what we're seeing. That's the biggest
yeah,
challenge, hands down, in the industry right now. So I had to drive it back home to that, because without the power, there's no data centers, there's no clients, there's really
yeah.
nothing.
No,
So
yeah, yeah. I think I've had that analogy so many times on this kind of podcast. Without kind of you can't drive a car without an engine kind of approach, and it's yeah, I think that's obviously the power is such an important aspect, and I don't think obviously we've got it figured out yet, and there's a lot of smart people obviously in the industry trying to figure out the power angle, but it's not simple, right? The grid infrastructure is built 50, 60, 70 years ago, probably not been updated over that time. And now we're coming into unprecedented growth where it needs like scaling 10x, and it's like it's not as easy to just scale when there's so many things involved in actually doing that.
for sure, and you mentioned too, right? There's political influence and complications as well. So all of that tied together is a perfect storm for the biggest challenge in our industry right now.
Yeah, and yeah, and like we said, there is other challenges, but until you solve that, the other challenges kind of are further down the pecking order, aren't they? Because yeah, nobody, no, like I said, no clients, no facilities, etc. We can't solve the power side. So how
Agreed. Yeah, those challenges
oh,
won't be a challenge if the power's not sorted out. So
yeah, yeah, and how do operators balance kind of the rapid growth with long term scalability and operational stability?
I would say it's a combination of flexibility, standardization, and long-term planning.
Yeah,
The strongest operators today, in my opinion, they're planning for adaptability rather than simply optimizing for current demand, right? So AI workloads, infrastructure requirements are evolving. They're really evolving so quickly that organizations need scalable frameworks that can really adapt over time without constantly redesigning operational models from scratch, right? So your processes, everything that you're doing needs to be scalable. Long-term success really comes from it really comes down to operational standardization. leadership alignment, strong leadership, proactive planning, really a strong profile for treating risk appropriately and efficiently,
Yeah.
and maintaining flexibility while scaling, right? I think you can't be too rigid. The industry is always changing, so we need to be prepared to do that to do that as well. And I think the goal really isn't, it's not scaling quickly anymore. It's scaling sustainably. That's the real focus for those that want to be successful.
Yeah. What when you talk about obviously when you talk about sustainably, what do you mean just to the to normal per what do you mean by yeah, sustainably?
Yeah, so I think what I mean by that is, first of all, do you have the right team and program around you, right? So
Yeah.
are you scaled appropriately, or is your firm just focused on keeping costs down, right? Like all those things impact the ability for teams to be able to deliver, right? So
Yeah.
I think sustainability starts with people. You need the people in the right roles that are well trained, that need good programs to bring them up to speed quickly. I think joining a data center firm really is a challenge because there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of information that people are taking on. So, what does that firm's onboarding program look like? How quickly can someone hit the ground running? How quickly can someone hit the ground running within their team, right? So those are the types of things that I think really set success stories apart in this industry, is being able to sustainably scale.
Yeah.
Testing your processes, right? So it's one thing to have processes and procedures created. It's another thing to test them, at scale with a lot going on, with full load coming into buildings. And what are those lessons learned, right? What we draft or what we produce or create to solve problems isn't always perfect. So I think it's really important to have those lessons learned, with wider teams after incidents occur. That way you can, look back at what went wrong or what could have gone better, really take a close look at it and treat it and then move forward, right? I think that's the key. If you're identifying areas to improve and you're putting that time into the process to actually improve, it will be successful, but it doesn't just happen on its own, right? Like just because things are going well now doesn't mean they're going to be going well a year from now,
Yeah.
2 years from now. So to me, that's the key with the sustainability, having the team to support, that delivery model, having the tools to support that team to deliver that delivery model, and not getting too comfortable. I think that's really important. You know, Even if something's working well, test it. Like those are the things that we need to be doing every day.
Yeah, I think it's same in any industry because of the hype of kind of growth in the industry. You almost sometimes in any organization or industry, you want to be thinking 12, 24 months down the line because we could be at this point today, but we know we're going to be at that point in 24 months. So operationally, we need to act like we're that company now so that when we get there, we're not, oh my God, like we can't support the growth that we've enabled. So
Exactly.
do you see that a lot in from an operational standpoint where you're thinking further down the line, I imagine?
For sure. It's very important. The OpEx side versus, the CapEx, right?
Yeah,
Building a data center costs hundreds of $1 million. Operating it typically costs tens of millions of dollars, right? So there's a big difference in the dollar value between building the data center and actually operating it
yeah,
sustainably. So from my perspective, that's increasingly key, right? Because there's less room for error. You
yeah,
know, it's something that I think is really important. It really takes that focus to be diligent and you know, to your point, what's working a couple of years ago might needs to be tested, needs to actually be successful, right? So I think it's something that is going to change in this industry going forward. I think less reaction, more proactivity. The people that are proactive are the ones that are going to be successful, and it's a really difficult environment to be proactive now. So we're finding we have to work harder and harder to achieve that.
yeah. I think it's just because it's so complex what we're doing now. It's hard to take a almost like you need to take a step back and look, where it's going. Do you know what I mean? Because you're so focused on, because there's deadlines and you miss them deadlines and you're in your supplier or who you're responsible for is going to be frustrated, right? To say the least. And then there's the monetary aspect for fines and things like that. So I think
Of course.
sometimes it needs them people to kind of take a step back, who aren't maybe focused day to day in the weeds and actually make sure that they're ready for the shift that comes further down the line.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really important to plan that time into your schedule, especially if you're in a leadership role. But even if you're, boots on the ground, day to day type of role supporting the site, it's really important to take that time to plan ahead. What risk do you see now? What risk could you see in the future? What's your mitigation tactics to respond to those risks? How do you treat them now? How do you treat them over a longer period of time, right? So it is key to really take that look forward and plan ahead. Sometimes it's scary because you don't know what you're planning for all the time,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
you really need to, that's why it's so important to keep a ear close to the ground, collaborate with people in the industry, try to get some shared experiences from others or even people within your own firm. So yeah, I think it's going to be increasingly exciting to watch over the next few years. Hoping the industry is up to the challenge. I think we are.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And when you talk about the industry, do you think we're heading towards kind of major operational infrastructure changes, or do you think it's going to be more gradual moving forward on the evolution side?
Yeah, I think we're still really truly in the earlier stages of AI infrastructure expansion. So I honestly think that over the next few years, I expect continued massive investment to AI focused hyperscale infrastructure. That's a given. We're going to continue to see larger high density campuses, more intelligent operational models driven by automation and analytics, things like that. But I also think the infrastructure strategy itself will become an even bigger competitive advantage for major technical companies moving forward. So I mean, infrastructure strategy is becoming a core business strategy. Is the truth of it. So
Yeah,
I think that's kind of what I see like from a future outlook and where we're going.
yeah. Well, I think every major corporation now is kind of have someone on the inside of the business who's kind of like their own data center owner. Like they don't own a facility, but you think of some of the big banks and they have their own data center team within the bank itself. So I think it's
For sure.
like you said, the infrastructure, everything is data driven now. AI is
Absolutely.
going to make that enhance that further. No matter what anyone says, it will. So I think, yeah, like you said, infrastructure's almost got a seat at the boardroom table these days, whereas it probably didn't 5, 10 years ago. Ultimately,
For sure. I definitely agree with you there, Sean.
yeah. And obviously, from a like the future leaning towards more hyperscale campuses, distributed infrastructure, or mix of both. Where do you see that happening? Do you see it being more distributed colo, or just still see it leaning more towards hyperscale campuses?
Yeah, I think we're going really to see both a gradual evolution in both areas there. I think traditional hyperscale principles still work really very well, but AI workloads are beginning to push the limits of existing assumptions around cooling, density, and power distribution, things like that. So I don't think the industry completely reinvents itself overnight, but I do believe we'll see meaningful operational infrastructure shifts over the next decade. Think AI
Yeah,
is really forcing the industry to think some longstanding infrastructure assumption, to rethink some kind of longstanding infrastructure assumptions. So that's kind of how I view it.
yeah. And from an operational commercial perspective, does that alter anything in your decision making, like over the coming years? How does that affect from an operational commercial perspective?
Yeah, I think from an operational commercial perspective, where we see impacts there are, you know, particularly things like benchmarking are going to be extremely important, right? For us, I think there's so much more data, like we talked about, becoming more and more available. I think the more that we have that opportunity to dive into the data, the more we're able to really sharpen our pencils and kind of deliver better products within our scope. So I think from that perspective, data is king. I think the data has really been, uh, a key piece for transformation in like commercial operations and where I see that asset of the business going forward.
Yeah, so you know, even more so than in the future, you know, you're justifying decisions by data driven analysis and what you're
100%.
seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much more data now than there was 4 years ago, right?
Yeah,
So I think using it to our advantage is extremely important. We're about to get a whole lot more data. Obviously there's a shift with liquid cooling happening in the industry. So,
yeah,
you know, shift from air cooling to liquid cooling's here. I think it's going to be a whole new set of data that we're going to be obviously working through. There'll be some challenges there with design and, you know, actual operations once the building's built, but I think that is an opportunity for us as well. There's just continually going to be more and more data and opportunity for us to really improve. So I'm looking forward to diving in over the next few years there.
yeah. I think ultimately when it's data driven, ultimately it takes the emotions out of decision making, doesn't it? And that's not in any walk of life, right? If you can use the data to validate your yeah, and justify your decisions, that's the best because it's black and white then, isn't it? I know it's not always
It
to
is.
that 100% degree, but there's some underlying things in the data that may not make sense, but ultimately 9 times out of 10 the data tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100% agree. I think data gives confidence, right? I think you brought up a great point. It takes emotion out of it. It's a lot easier to feel confident in a plan forward, or a business plan when you've got data behind it to support it. So I think that will be, you know, somewhere where AI increasingly contributes for us is, you know, utilizing AI to your advantage. Obviously, from a data-driven perspective, there's huge advantages to that. But to your point too, like, not everything's apples to apples too, right? So we need to take a look at certain things and make sure we're, you know, checking all the right outliers and that there's nothing,
Yeah,
manipulating our data, or, maybe our new base case is different, or there's some factors that have different impacts towards it. So yeah, it's not bulletproof, but it's something that gives us, some good confidence to stand on and really helps us drive our forward thinking and our business plans for the future.
yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And obviously, like you said, from no data is bulletproof, and you have to look for the trends within it, or the outliers is the perfect example, don't you? But I think, yeah, like I said, if you can take the emotion out of decisions and have it more fact based, then it is easier for leaders.
Absolutely. I think, you know, remaining calm in a leadership role is one of the most important things you could ever ask for as an attribute in a leadership position. And, you know, leaders that get emotional, it's good to be emotional when it's in the right context, right? But I think, leaders that make emotional decisions really struggle, right? And, by default, their teams struggle because it's contagious. So when you can take a data-driven approach, it makes it much easier. You're taking emotion out of it. It's a lot easier to substantiate something when there's substantial evidence behind it.
Yeah, and I always ask this because this podcast we have executive director level on there. How's your, how do you feel like the role, was any role of a leader within this will have to evolve in the coming years? How do you feel like that will have to evolve from a leadership um, board perspective?
Yeah, I think leaders in this industry, really any industry, but in this industry in particular, leaders really need to be um, in touch with their team. I think it's super important that, they have a good understanding of who's on their team. Obviously, in large companies, it might be difficult to know everyone, but I think it's really apparent to team members when leaders within a company go out of their way to try to get to know them or their team or what they're doing, or even just take interest in what they're doing or what their team delivers.
Yeah,
So I think, that aspect is key for leaders to be successful. I think hiring the right people is key. So leaders need to bring in other leaders that are, well equipped to do the job. I think, like any industry, there's strong talent, there's less strong talent. And from what I can tell, the leaders that continually deliver successfully, they're strong communicators, They have good moral values. They understand forward business planning, and they're agile. They're able to adapt. They're able to, face a challenge and really come to a conclusion pretty quickly with bringing in the right stakeholders. I think that's super important. Relying on your team, knowing where those strengths are. Who do you lean on when this happens? Who do you lean on when that happens? So for leaders, I think communication's really the key going forward. That you're going to maintain a really well balanced, strong team if you have a good communication model within your business. I think that's where a lot of probably hyperscale developers fall short is there's so many different things moving on in their business, and there's not a unified, clear goal or
Yeah,
delivery model message from leadership. You could ask six different leaders and you'll get six different answers. So I think that's key is making sure leadership's got a unified vision. The right
yeah,
people are there. Those people have empathy. They want to build a team with good people. Those are all things I think are important in leadership to be
yeah.
successful.
Yeah, I think, like you said, communication, any business. I think if you speak to leadership, they all kind of have to sing from the same hymn sheet, don't they? They may have different opinions, but they need to culminate, and that needs to ultimately be reflected to peers and people maybe a lower level to they are. I think, like you said, in this industry more than most, I think you've got to be agile, right? Things move so fast and your business turns like an oil tanker when the industry evolves in that you've got to be left behind. So I think you have to be agile, open to change, because if you're not, you will ultimately left behind. And I think that the people that will win the fastest is the best method I've seen ultimately.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sean. I think the individuals that are most willing to change where it's appropriate are the ones that are going to be the most successful. I think if you're stuck in your ways and you're confident in a product that's been rolled out years ago, and I just don't see that being successful. It's increasingly challenging to deliver without really taking a closer look,
Yeah,
in real time if what you're actually delivering is working.
yeah. I think you have, no matter how senior you are, you have got to be you have got to ultimately, like you said, you've got to empower your team, but you've also got to also get in the trenches sometimes with them and understand maybe, yeah, what's
Sure.
working, what isn't, etc. Because I think that's really important in any business, but especially in the data center world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to lead by example. I think you need to really get your hands dirty sometimes and sends a strong message to your team if you show them you're not above certain tasks, right? I think what might not be super important to you could be very important to someone else and
Exactly.
their well-being professionally. So obviously we all have, we're all racing against time and we have limited time, but when you do have time and you have the ability to, show an interest in someone else's challenges, whether it's big or small, I think that goes a long way. People see
Yeah,
that, right? People catch
100%.
on. They want to buy into leaders that, you know, don't truly feel like they're above their team, right? I think that's something that is important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's a brilliant point, to be fair. So, and as infrastructure continues scaling globally, what do you think kind of separates organisations that maybe operate efficiently at scale from those that struggle from an operational standpoint?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things I would love to touch on here. I mean, for one, it's how organized is your business, right? It's one thing to have great processes, and we talked a lot about that today. But how do you find those processes? How do you communicate them, right? Like, how visible is it within, and how easy is it to find? Does it take you 20 minutes to go find a process in your central system, or is it something that you know where it is and you know where to find it right away? So document management, sounds administrative because it is, but it's extremely important. Communicating formal policies, procedures, especially when people first join the company, right? I think is incredibly important. Making sure that they have a full list of policies at their disposal, not just policies that impact their role either, but you know, wider policies, whether they be corporate ones or different teams. All of those things tie together to paint the
Mm.
picture of what good looks like. Um, I think in addition to that, it's, having a real systematic approach to bringing on new sites, right? So, what does your training model look like? You've hired a bunch of great people to operate the data center, but the reality is most of them probably have never worked together before. They've never communicated together before. So, how do you get them ready to go day one? You know, having workshops with the team on site, making sure that they're talking through MOPS, SOPs, and all those types of planning um, initiatives, and that everyone's crystal clear. Who are the other stakeholders involved? What are their roles in it? I think having a RACI matrix is extremely important. It's hard to do on a kind of a corporate level to some extent because there's a lot of different roles, but especially at the site level, we focus a lot on a good RACI matrix. Who's
Yeah,
responsible for what, which vendors are delivering what, those types of things. So I think those things are all really important. And I think, again, we'll go back to testing your processes out. You know, how do you identify risk? What does that look like, right? Those are things that really need a lot of attention. And risk, if your risk policy is, you'll put something in a log and someone looks at it, every couple of months or whatever, it's not really a risk management strategy,
yeah,
right? So I think those are the types of things where, it's one thing to say you have it, but are you actually utilizing it, proficiently, or actually testing it? Are you actually learning from it? Are you actually evolving it? So I think that to me is what I see.
yeah. I think that's and obviously for my end, obviously I'm not involved inside a data center day to day, but when you talked about it there in terms of companies at the moment are having to hire at mass, right? They're having to hire multiple people in different business units, etc. And I think one thing that companies miss a lot of the time is that onboarding. How
Oh
what
yeah.
are your onboarding process like? How operationally, because you're paying people a large sum of money, right? Every day they're not operational is a day of a missed opportunity, some could say. And I see a lot of businesses place loads of emphasis hiring some great people, but it takes them so long to onboard to actually, where they can be so much slicker in that side of things. I think
Right.
hopefully if you can get them processes right and things like document management, yes, it's admin, but it massively helps. I think that's the thing that I often see with companies, like place a great emphasis on hiring and then they have a terrible onboarding process. That one could lead to somebody, not being as productive as quickly as possible. But secondly, if you get on board into a new business and you think everything's all over the place, it's going to give you a negative impression. Are
For
you then
sure.
going to stay long term? So I think it's a massive thing that companies, in my opinion, miss out on, that onboarding, and making sure you get that process right and that document management, etc.
I agree with you completely. And I think, the point you just brought up, right? Like it impacts a lot of different areas of the industry, like yours as well, right? Like, I'm sure you know this better than me, but I think there's some statistic, I don't remember the exact figure, but the majority of people leave new jobs in the first 90 days, right?
Yeah,
That's what I've come to learn, and I'm sure you probably see it a lot. And I'm
yeah,
sure for you, right? If you're, advocating for a business and really excited to bring someone onto it, and all that goes well, but then the onboarding doesn't go well, I'm sure that doesn't feel good for you or for
yeah,
your
yeah,
clients,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
um, I do agree. I think it's an area that this goes beyond data centers. I think probably in most industries, from what I've ever seen, um, you know, more often than not, a company's onboarding program isn't as strong as it should be.
yeah,
Um, and I think the reality is a lot of individuals rely on, the corporate vision for the onboarding program, right? Which is very important. Don't get me wrong. I think it's super important to understand company values, what the benefit packages look like and the policies. Those are all extremely important things. You need that to be successful. You need to know that about the job you're taking.
yeah,
But I think past that, there's onboarding from that perspective, and then there's onboarding specific to the role, right? I
yeah,
think it's really difficult for a centralized onboarding program to really hit all the intricacies of what you need to know to be successful in your role. So that's why I focus when I bring someone on new, go through your onboarding program that our company provides, which is great. And then, we have a separate onboarding program, job
Yeah.
specific to the role. I think it's super important. Oftentimes people get thrown into something really quickly without proper training or proper knowledge or understanding of how the company works. And I think it's super important when I hire someone new, I try to make sure they get trained up, get as many questions answered, really kind of operate a little behind the scenes for a few weeks until they get more comfortable. Then we
Yeah.
start doing introductions internally, and then we get to external and all that, because you want that person to be successful. And they're, when they're taking a new job, in a lot of ways, they're placing their bet on you as the leader or the manager.
Yeah.
So for us, it's increasingly important to give them the best experience they can have at a human level and at a professional level. So I agree with you. I think it's an extremely important thing, onboarding appropriately, having all of those things to be successful. And I think it's an area that probably most of the industry falls short.
Yeah. And I think that what ends up happening, and it's probably like this in every industry, but I see it, even because the data center market is so fast paced and everyone doesn't have 2 minutes, right? I think
Right.
the idea is we hire a senior person into my team. Yeah. I would expect them to just hit the ground running straight away. And that, you pay for that, etc. And you are expecting that to some degree. But
Right.
from the process, documentation management, etc., what they worked in, maybe if they worked for a competitor, could be completely different to how you operate. And if you just let them figure that out for themselves, it is going to take them longer to get up to speed. And I think that's where a strong manager needs to understand, right, how you worked before, how
Right.
this is how we work, and then showing them that. Yes, it might take
Absolutely.
a little bit more time in the interim and at the start, but over the first 6 months, I'd like to think ultimately that person would get up to speed a lot quicker if you do that.
For sure. Yeah, I completely agree. And, I think it really comes down to, you're starting a new role, right? You want to be successful. The more tools you have at your disposal to be successful, generally the better, employee that
100%.
you can be, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's something that really is important, for a lot of people that are joining the industry for the first time, and it's important for us as leaders to help set a good impression. I think it's really key. I also think it's extremely key to, you have someone new coming in from a different organization. You mentioned that, right? I think it's really important to understand, within reason, like not sharing anything intellectual property related or confidential, but, how did you do things over there?
yeah,
Here's our processes. Is there any, feedback that you could provide, right? Like I think getting a
exactly.
new fresh set of
Yeah,
eyes is
yeah,
really important. And, doesn't mean you have to completely revamp your policies because you get input from someone from your team. But, if you get input from your team, it most likely will be meaningful and it's worth taking a closer look at. So I always encourage that. I think it's really important. And also just like, you know, a couple weeks after you finish your onboarding, what do you think was missing? What could we have delivered to you that would have made
yeah,
your role easier, your onboarding easier? So, yeah, those are things that make people feel comfortable. They see that you're trying to make it better for the next person, which is all we can ever ask for, right? Is we're trying to do a
100%.
better job every day.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that was a great point as well. And I didn't want my point to come across. It was like my way or the highway. Ultimately, like you hire somebody at a senior level or somebody from a different industry, a competitor or anything. If you're hiring them because you want the
right.
what you're behind them to do to be better long term. So if they can look at it, could be an operational process, commercial process in your aspect, and say, well, in my old company we did X, Y, and Z, which helps us do this, and it fits into the company they're now working for, then that's got to
100%.
be something as a leader you empower people to ultimately make come up with solutions, etc. And if it's the right thing for the business, then it should be implemented.
For sure. And you think about it, right? Why wouldn't you want to be challenged in the right way by a new employee? Like
Yeah,
you're trying to hire someone that can grow into the role and, develop into more of a leadership role. Those are the type of people that I want to hire. People that,
yeah,
look at things closely, analyze them, ask questions. Why do we do it this way? Maybe we should do it this way. Here's why. Bring some supporting data to prove their points. So I encourage that. I think it's really important that we don't get stuck in our ways. It's okay to be humble as a leader. I think a lot of people kind of fall short on that pretty often, and it's okay to not know everything. I think it's actually extremely empowering to admit that and,
yeah,
hire people that can make you better, right? So, I think that's something that it's kind of like an old school mindset, right? Of do everything the manager says, everything the manager says is right. If that's our mindset going forward, I can assure you we're all going to fail in this industry.
Exactly. Perfect. And the final question, I suppose, if you were making, trying to ask this to a lot of our guests, if you were making a major investment into the future of the industry today, like where would you place your bet?
It's a great question, Sean. I think I probably focus heavily on power infrastructure, energy innovation, a broader AI infrastructure ecosystem. I think kind of a moonshot potential, which will be really interesting to watch, will be um, the potential for nuclear coming into the data center industry
Yeah,
is obviously out there. So I think there's a huge upside to that. I think there is an extreme amount of potential. There's a kind of a high risk, high reward look at it from my perspective. But
yeah,
um, when you think about it, power, we talked a lot about power today. I'm sure you always do on these podcasts, but
yeah.
you know, if traditional power constraints are real, like we're agreeing they are, what other options are there, right? So that's where I place my bet is, you know, the overall energy innovation and where this is going to go in this industry over the next 5, 10 years is going to be really pivotal. I think the next 5 years is going to redefine this industry in terms of energy innovation, power infrastructure, and kind of define a new standard. So it's really exciting to see. I think if I was a betting man, that's where I'd be putting my money is
Yeah,
right there.
yeah. I think a lot of people, are looking, I don't think people have the answers 100%, but a lot of people are looking at nuclear power. I think there's a lot of policies, etc., safety procedures to put in place to make sure it's, we can utilize it. But like you said, I think that is the one thing. Well, there's a number of things that can hold any industry back, but at the moment, the main thing, like I said, I use that analogy, the engine to drive a car, because somebody actually used it on the podcast, right? But it is true. If we think of the power as the engine, it doesn't, and the data center as the car, it doesn't work if it's not, if the power isn't there ultimately. So, yeah, I think it's a great point, and I'd probably say the same if I was a betting man as well.
I would say my second, strong second. Don't sleep on. I think don't sleep on modular infrastructure. I think I see that need in the industry is, you know, as we're talking about scaling, right? Like the modular aspect really does cut down lead times, and it's really when you dive into it and look at the data, it's pretty impressive to see how modular systems can really speed up deployments. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see that evolution as well.
Yeah, I think ultimately anything that can we're in an industry, and you're on the commercial side, so it's maybe not, but ultimately I think most businesses, money is more important than speed, and I know the two are kind of hand in hand, but in this industry it feels like sometimes getting things done quicker is more important than the cost. And you're in the commercial side, that might not be always ring true in your side, but I think, the modular side, if you can do things, if you can do things in factories, that ultimately mean there's less time on site built, manufacturing products, etc. That'll all help make the facility operational quicker. And as an owner developer, the
Yep,
your job is to get that facility operational in the fastest time possible, because then you're going to get paid by your customers ultimately.
for sure. Yeah, it's I'm excited. The next few years are gonna be a lot of fun. I plan on sticking around the data center industry. I don't plan on leaving it. I'm sure you feel the same. So
Yeah, great
um,
industry. It really is.
yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch.
Fantastic. Well, really appreciate having you on. You've been a fantastic guest. Obviously, we said before, it'd be great to have someone on more from an operational standpoint, and I think you've talked about some fantastic points. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always. Really enjoyed today, and best of luck with everything you're working on going forward.
You too.